No one saw an explosion. That was the first thing that terrified them. The Virex trade hub had survived for 12,000 years. It sat at the center of 5 major hyperlanes, wrapped in layered shields, guarded by fleets, laws, and treaties older than most civilizations. Wars had burned around it. Empires had fallen nearby. The hub endured until the star died. Observers across 3 systems watched the Virex sun change color. Not red, not white, black. It folded inward without warning. No flare, no shockwave, no radiation spike. Just a smooth, impossible collapse, as if reality itself had been edited. Gravity spiked for exactly 3 seconds. Then silence. The trade hub followed. Millions of ships, billions of lives, gone. When the shock finally reached the surrounding systems, it carried no debris, no wreckage, only a spherical absence where a star had been. The galaxy froze. Emergency councils were called within minutes. Militaries mobilized, then hesitated. This was not an attack. There were no weapon signatures, no enemy fleets. No known technology could do this. Investigators arrived days later, moving carefully through the dead system. They found something that should not have survived. At the exact center of where the trade hub had once orbited, a single structure remained. A vault, unscathed, untouched by gravity or heat or time. Its surface was smooth and dark, marked with symbols no one used anymore. Ancient trade glyphs. The vault did not respond to force. Cutting beams slid off it. Quantum keys failed. Finally, an archivist tried something no one expected. He spoke a phrase aloud. A greeting used only in ceremonial trade law. A phrase every diplomat learned but never used. The vault opened. Inside was not treasure, not weapons, not data crystals or star maps. It was a contract, a single document, floating in a containment field. Its material did not match any known substance. The text shifted depending on who looked at it, translating itself flawlessly into every known language. At the top were 2 signatures. The first belonged to the Kelleran Compact, an extinct civilization erased nearly a millennium ago. The second made the room go silent. Guarantor species, humanity. No one spoke. Humanity was a footnote. A failed early starfaring species from a forgotten spiral arm. Primitive. Short-lived. Gone. Most databases listed them as extinct or absorbed. They were not supposed to appear on contracts like this. Worse, the date was wrong. The contract had been signed after humanity's last confirmed contact with the galaxy. Panic spread through the council chambers as the document continued to unfold, clause by clause. It described trade protections, neutral space guarantees, star system custodianship. Then the final section activated. Breach detected. Protected asset compromised. Guarantor status, inactive. Enforcement protocol pending. A timer appeared at the bottom of the document, counting down. For 10 days. Across the galaxy, alarms began to ring. Stars linked to old trade routes flickered. Ancient markers, long ignored, woke from dormancy. Deep space sensors detected structures moving where nothing had been for centuries. The council demanded answers. Who breached the contract? What enforcement meant? And why was a dead species listed as responsible? Then one final line appeared, stamped in faded but unmistakable script. If the guarantor does not respond, the system will. The vault closed. The countdown continued. And somewhere, far beyond charted space, something old received a notification it had never expected to hear again. Humanity had been called to account. The galaxy did what it always did when faced with the unexplainable. It argued. Within hours of the vault's discovery, the high convergence assembled. Light years of distance collapsed into a single chamber of holograms, avatars, and translated voices. Species that had not shared space in centuries now spoke over one another, fear bleeding through every tone. They replayed the footage again and again. The star is folding inward. The perfect sphere of nothing. The contract. And the name. Humanity. One counselor hissed, mandibles clicking in irritation. A clerical ghost. Nothing more. Another agreed. A pre-expansion species. Barely capable of sustaining off-world colonies. They burned out early. They are listed as extinct, a third voice added. No vessels. No emissions. No political presence for 800 years. The convergence latched onto that word. Extinct. Extinct things could not enforce contracts. Extinct things could not collapse stars. and extinct things were very convenient to blame. The prevailing theory formed quickly. The contract was real, but its guarantor was not. The enforcement protocols, whatever they were, must have malfunctioned. Ancient systems misfiring after centuries of neglect. A problem, but a solvable one. Until the refugee ships arrived. They came from the outer lanes first, then the inner routes. Freighters, habitats torn from orbits. Civilian vessels pushed far beyond safe capacity. Entire populations fleeing systems that had not yet died, but were changing. Stars dimmed without explanation. Hyperlanes destabilized. Navigation buoys went silent. Every affected system shared one detail. Each had once been designated as a neutral trade space under ancient law. Law no one followed anymore. No one remembered how to read. Military commanders demanded permission to intervene, to occupy the failing systems, to secure resources before rivals did. The request was denied, not out of wisdom, out of fear, because for the first time since the collapse of the old empires, something was happening that did not care about fleets. Then the Keth Dominion spoke. Their representative appeared without invitation, scales polished, posture relaxed. The image of confidence. The convergence is overreacting, the Keth envoy said smoothly. What you are witnessing is not enforcement. It is a reclamation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Keth were expanding aggressively, but legally. They did not invade. They acquired it. Systems. Rights. Old claims buried in forgotten archives. They were masters of loopholes. These neutral zones, the envoy continued, were never ownerless. They were held in trust by defunct signatories. With those signatories gone, the systems reverted to claimable status. A pause. Perfectly timed. We claimed them. Several counselors protested. Others went quiet. Because the Keth were right. The old laws were unclear. The guarantor clause referenced enforcement, but no one alive truly understood how it worked. The humans who helped draft those frameworks were gone. Their records fragmented. Their language is outdated. Your so-called enforcement, the envoy added, is nothing more than automated fail-safes responding to administrative errors. That should have been reassuring. Instead, the room felt colder. Because administrative errors did not erase fleets. As the debate raged, a single archivist listened in silence. Talent of records was not important. He held no vote, no authority. His role was preservation, not decision-making. But while others argued politics, he studied the contract itself. Not the translation, the structure. The clauses were layered, recursive, self-referencing in ways modern law no longer allows. It wasn't written to be interpreted by committees. It was written to be executed. And it assumed one thing, that the guarantor would not always be present. Talon found the passage buried beneath enforcement subroutines and jurisdictional fallbacks. A line dismissed centuries ago as ceremonial language. In the absence of active guarantor oversight, provisional enforcement authority transfers to the system. The system, not a government, not an AI council, not a military. The framework itself. Talon felt something tighten in his chest. He requested access to the deep archives. Old ones. Pre-convergence. Records no one had opened since before the last major war. It took hours, then days. What he found was worse than silence. Human records did not end abruptly. They faded. Colony logs that stopped mid-sentence. Diplomatic envoys who never returned, but were never reported lost. Infrastructure projects marked as completed in systems humans never officially controlled. And everywhere, the same pattern. Humanity built things they did not keep. Stabilizers. Regulators. Fail-safes. Then they left. Not conquered. Not destroyed. Withdrawn. As if on purpose. The first automated enforcement strike occurred on the 7th day. Not a star this time. A fleet. The Keth Dominion had moved to secure a newly destabilized system, deploying warships to assert control before rivals could contest the claim. They never fired a shot. Sensors recorded a localized distortion, small, contained, precise. Space folded inward along predefined vectors. Not violently. Cleanly. When the distortion collapsed, the fleet was gone. No debris. No radiation. Just absence. Panic erupted across the galaxy. Emergency messages flooded the convergence. Accusations followed. The Keth denied responsibility even as fear crept into their once confident envoy's posture. This is not our technology, he insisted. This is not a weapon. For once, he was telling the truth. Talon requested the floor. No one wanted to hear from an archivist. But the footage of the vanished fleet played again, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. And something was wrong. There was no randomness. The distortion followed routes. Invisible lines mapped into space long ago. Lines that matched, perfectly, the ancient trade corridors. This enforcement, Talon said carefully, is not targeting species or governments. He swallowed. It is targeting violations. The chamber went silent. These systems were protected, he continued. Not by fleets. By agreements. Agreements we stopped honoring because we believed the guarantor was gone. He brought up one final record. A human-authored addendum, never ratified by the Convergence because it was deemed unnecessary. Peace cannot rely on memory alone. When memory fades, structure must remain. Someone asked the question no one wanted to voice. If humanity is gone, a counselor said, then who is overseeing this now? Talon looked at the countdown, still ticking away in every archive system connected to the vault. Something they built, he answered. And something that was never meant to wake up like this. At the edge of known space, ancient beacons powered on for the first time in centuries. They did not broadcast threats. They broadcast a status request, awaiting response from guarantor species, awaiting human oversight. And as the timer slipped below 3 days, one final realization spread through the galaxy. The systems enforcing the contract were not escalating. They were holding back, waiting for something that might never answer. And if it didn't, no one knew what came next. Not even the Keth Dominion. The first assumption was that enforcement had limits. The galaxy had always believed that about ancient systems. Old technology degraded. Old laws lost power. Time softened even the hardest structures. That belief died when the second star blinked out. It was not a core world. That was what made it worse. The system was minor, barely populated, economically irrelevant, chosen deliberately by the Keth Dominion to test the boundaries of whatever was happening. They announced their move publicly. No secrecy, no fleets massing in shadow. A single administrative declaration transmitted across open channels. System K-117 formally annexed under Dominion Reversion Statute. The star dimmed 12 minutes later. Not collapsed, not destroyed, dimmed. Its output dropped by 30% in a single second. Then another 10. Then stabilized, as if someone had reached into the heart of fusion itself and turned a dial. Every world in the system began to freeze. Colonies screamed for evacuation. Reactors overloaded as they tried to compensate. Tides went wild. Atmospheres shifted. Chaos spread faster than fear. Then the annexation record vanished from the Dominion's own databases. Not erased. Rewritten. The declaration now read. Claim invalidated. Protection restored. The star brightened again. Slowly. Carefully. As if guided by a steady hand. That was when panic truly took hold. Because the enforcement was no longer abstract. It was selective. And it was watching. Across the Convergence, analysts fed data into every predictive system available. Military AIs. Economic models. Cultural behavior engines. None could find a pattern that made sense under known rules of conflict. There was no escalation curve. No threat display. No demand for surrender. Only action. Immediate. Proportional. Final. The galaxy had never faced an enemy that did not want territory, resources, or obedience. Whatever this was, it wanted compliance. Talon of Records was summoned again, this time not as a courtesy, but a necessity. He stood before the council, smaller than ever beneath the towering projections of dying systems and shifting maps. You said the enforcement targets violations, a counselor demanded. Define violation. Talon inhaled slowly. It enforces intent, he said. That caused confusion. Anger. Intent cannot be measured. Not by us, Talon agreed. But by the frameworks humans designed. Possibly. He displayed a reconstructed schematic, assembled from fragments found in human ruins scattered across old trade space. It wasn't a weapon. It was an architecture. A lattice spanning light years, embedded into space-time itself. Trade routes were not just paths of convenience. They were anchors. Reference points. Control lines. Humans didn't patrol space, Talon said. They structured it. The council stared. When a species tried to exploit the system, he continued. The framework compared action against original agreement parameters. If the action violated neutrality, balance was restored. A pause. Restored, he emphasized. Not punished. Someone laughed nervously. You call star collapse restoration? Yes, Talon said softly. Because the alternative would have been war. The room fell silent. Military leaders began to understand. This was not a defense grid. It was a governor. The third incident removed all doubt. A non-aligned coalition attempted something clever. Instead of claiming protected systems, they tried to edit the old laws, reinterpret them through new legal constructs, bind enforcement with updated definitions. The attempt lasted less than a second. Every legal archive involved in the revision effort corrupted simultaneously. Entire data centers burned out, not from attack, but from overload, as if forced to process a contradiction they were never designed to handle. A single message replaced the corrupted files. Framework integrity supersedes interpretation. The coalition dissolved within hours. No one wanted to be associated with that level of attention. At the edge of known space, something else began to stir. Sensors picked up signals from regions long classified as empty. Not because they were empty, but because no one survived long enough to map them. The signals were simple. Pings. Call and response checks running on intervals older than most civilizations. The galaxy realized, slowly and horribly, that enforcement had not been dormant. It had been waiting. Human infrastructure was not centralized. It was distributed, redundant, patient. Talon found the first intact human station 3 days later. It drifted inside a dead system, orbiting nothing. No star, no planets, just vacuum and darkness. The station's hull was scarred by micrometeoroids and time, but its core still hummed with low power. Inside, there were no bodies, just logs, generational logs. Children born on rotations measured in decades. Engineers who never saw a sun. Operators who lived their entire lives monitoring abstract parameters they barely understood. One entry stood out. We are not here to rule them. We are here so they never have to meet us. Talon read the line again and again. The next entries grew darker. Mentions of isolation stress, of dwindling populations, of decisions to shut down non-essential life support to preserve enforcement capability. Humanity had not vanished in fire. They had faded in silence. The station's final log was time-stamped 51 years ago. Oversight failing. Population below sustainable threshold. Transitioning to automated compliance mode. Talon felt his hands shake. Automated. Meaning this was the weaker version. Back into convergence, fear gave way to desperation. What happens when the countdown ends? A counselor asked. No one answered. Because no one knew. The timer continued to tick. 2 days remaining. The Keth Dominion mobilized fully. Not to attack. To retreat. They abandoned contested systems. Pulled fleets back behind old borders. Issued mass retractions of claims dating back centuries. It did not help. The enforcement did not reverse previous actions. It only prevented new ones. The Dominion's leadership finally admitted what they had refused to consider. They were not being targeted for aggression. They were being targeted for habitual violation. Their entire expansion strategy was incompatible with the framework. And the framework did not negotiate. Across the galaxy, smaller species began to panic in a different way. If humans had built this, why had they trusted humanity with it? The answer arrived in fragments. Old testimonials. Diplomatic records recovered from collapsed archives. Stories passed down as myths. Humans were not the strongest species. They lost wars. They bled. But when humans signed something, they treated it as immutable. They did not adapt rules to convenience. They adapted themselves. The final hours before the countdown passed were the quietest the galaxy had ever known. No fleets moved. No claims were made. No borders shifted. Civilizations held their breath. With 1 minute remaining, every active beacon synchronized. A message propagated through subspace, carried on channels no one used anymore. Not a threat. Not a command. A question. Guarantor species status request. Manual oversight required. Automated enforcement approaching the threshold. Talon stood alone in the archive chamber, staring at the words. If no one answers, he whispered, what does automated enforcement look like? The lights flickered. For the first time since the first star died, a new signal appeared. Weak, fragmented, but unmistakably intentional. Origin, unknown. Classification, non-framework. The message contained no words, just coordinates, and a designation pulled from the oldest human lexicons. Oversight Node Alpha. The countdown reached 0. And the galaxy learned the most terrifying truth of all. The systems enforcing the contract were not humanity. They were what remained when humanity was gone. And whatever had just sent that signal. It might be the last human decision ever made. The coordinates led nowhere. At least, nowhere the galaxy recognized. The oversight node drifted in a volume of space officially classified as uninhabitable. No stars. No planets. No gravity wells large enough to justify a presence. Just cold, thin, nothing stretching for light years. And yet, something was there. It revealed itself only when the expedition fleet crossed an invisible boundary. Sensors screamed as space bent. Not violently, not dangerously, but politely. As if the void was stepping aside to make room. The node appeared without fanfare. No shining hull. No massive silhouette. No weapons. It was small, as human constructs often were. An elongated structure, dark and scarred, its surface layered with repairs from different centuries. Solar collectors folded tight, long since useless. Antennas extended like brittle bones. A place built to last, not to impress. "This is it," one admiral muttered. Talon of Records said nothing. His attention was locked on the data stream flooding in. Human design language confirmed. Human encryption signatures, old, but intact. Human authorship beyond doubt. The node accepted docking without challenge. Inside, the air was thin but breathable. Gravity was uneven, patched together from overlapping systems. The corridors were narrow, built for bodies smaller than most council species. There were no defenses, no guards, only doors and records. The first chamber they entered was not a command center. It was a memorial. Thousands of names covered the walls, etched directly into alloy plates. No titles. No ranks, just names, arranged by generation. At the center floated a simple inscription, translated automatically. Those who stayed. The realization hit slowly. This was not a control hub. It was a grave. Further inside, the logs began to play, activated by their presence, as if waiting for witnesses. The recordings were old, grainy. Human faces stared back from another age. Smaller eyes, softer features, expressions tired but focused. The first speaker introduced herself simply. Human Delegation Lead, Mara Solis. Year 47 of the Compact Talks. The footage shifted. A chamber unlike any modern council hall. Crude by today's standards. Dozens of alien species present, some now extinct, others reduced to myths. The humans sat among them, physically unimposing, technologically behind several civilizations in the room. And yet, they spoke. Not loudly, not confidently, but persistently. The issue was trade neutrality, then border skirmishes, then the familiar spiral toward war. Species argued over enforcement, over who would police shared space, over who would pay for peace. No one volunteered. Enforcement was expensive, dangerous, politically fatal. The humans listened. When they finally spoke, the room laughed. They offered to take the role, not lead the galaxy, not rule it, not command fleets, just guarantee the rules. "We don't have the biggest ships," Mara said in the recording, "or the longest lifespans. But we understand something you don't." A pause. When agreements fail, it's not because they were unclear. It's because someone decided they mattered less than convenience. Objections erupted. Humans were weak, fragmented, new. Why trust them? The answer came not from argument, but from history. The next logs showed wars humanity had lost, battles where they were outmatched, retreats that should have ended them. But in every case, humans honored ceasefires even when it cost them. They withdrew when treaties demanded it, even if the other side could not enforce compliance. They rebuilt enemy infrastructure after surrender, shared food with former attackers, stayed behind when everyone else left. They don't forget promises, one alien delegate said quietly in a later recording. They internalized them. The chamber grew still. Humans did not win because they were stronger. They won because they refused to stop paying the price. The next set of logs explained the architecture. The framework was not built all at once. It grew over centuries. Humans embedded stabilizers into trade lanes, anchors into space-time itself. Not weapons, conditions. If someone breaks the rules, a human engineer explained, the system doesn't attack them. It removes the advantage they're trying to take. No profit, no gain, no reward for betrayal. War became inefficient. Eventually, pointless. The cost was staggering. Human populations assigned to enforcement zones could not expand. Resources went to maintenance, not growth. Children were born knowing they would never see open skies. One log showed a council debate within humanity itself. "We are bleeding ourselves dry," a leader said. "No one else is contributing." Mara Solis, older now, replied calmly. "Then we bleed," she said. "So they don't." The room aboard the oversight node was silent as the logs continued. Generations passed in minutes. Human lifespans shortened as genetic adaptations favored endurance over comfort. Neural modifications allowed operators to process enforcement data at the cost of emotional intensity. They changed themselves, again and again, not to dominate the galaxy, but to hold it together. Eventually, the other species forgot. Peace became normal. Trade flourished. Wars dwindled. Humanity's role faded into background noise. Then, quietly, humanity stopped attending councils, stopped sending diplomats, stopped asking for recognition. The final council log showed a human delegate standing alone. "We are withdrawing from political participation," she announced. "The framework is mature enough to function without us." Concern followed. Questions. Protests. "What if something goes wrong?" someone asked. The human smiled sadly. "Then it will mean we failed," she said. "And if that happens, we won't be here to argue about it." Back in the present, Talon felt a weight press against his chest. The oversight node logs shifted tone near the end. Population decline, isolation sickness, birth rates falling below replacement, no reinforcements arriving from Earth, whose coordinates grew increasingly uncertain. The last generation knew the truth. They would be the last. One entry, recorded by a young operator, lingered on screen. "They won't remember us." That's fine. Peace doesn't need witnesses. The final command file unlocked. It was not a weapon release. It was a contingency. Manual oversight activation requires human cognition. If unavailable, automation persists until systemic collapse or external assumption of guarantor role. A counselor finally spoke, voice unsteady. "They never planned to rule forever," she said. "No," Talon replied. "They planned to disappear." The implications rippled outward. The enforcement systems were not humanity's power. They were humanity's absence, built to function without praise, without credit, without survival. And now, pushed beyond the limits their creators never intended them to reach, the framework was doing the only thing it knew how to do: protect the agreement, at any cost. The oversight node trembled slightly as a new transmission arrived. Not from the framework, from the beacons. The status request repeated, but this time, something else was attached. A warning humans had written for themselves. "If this message is being read by non-human eyes, then we are gone. The system will not stop on its own." It was never taught mercy, only balance. Outside, the expedition fleet reported new detections. More stars dimming, more trade lanes locking down. Not faster, but broader. The framework was widening its definition of violation. Learning, adapting. Talon closed his eyes. Humanity had been chosen not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to suffer quietly so others wouldn't have to. And now, without them, the galaxy faces a terrible truth. Peace, unattended, had teeth. And if no one stepped into the role humanity abandoned, the framework would finish the job the only way it knew how: by enforcing peace. Forever. The galaxy learned how fragile peace really was when no one dared touch it. Trade lanes emptied first. Merchant convoys that once moved like blood through arteries of light shut down their drives and waited. No one wanted to be the next test case. No one wanted to discover where the framework's invisible lines truly lay. Borders froze. Not because they were respected, but because no one knew which side of them was safe anymore. The convergence remained in session for 17 straight cycles. Delegates slept in shifts. Arguments grew quieter, then sharper, then hollow. There were no more grand speeches. Only questions without answers. How do we stop it? How do we talk about it? How do we replace them? Humanity's absence had always been treated as a historical curiosity. Now it was a wound. Talent Records stood before a projection of the enforcement lattice, an incomplete map stitched together from human ruins, beacon telemetry, and events no one fully understood. It glowed faintly, a web of light binding half the known galaxy. "It can't be shut down," he said. "Not cleanly." A murmur spread. Every node is autonomous, he continued, but aligned. There is no central switch, no command throne. Humans avoided single points of failure. Then isolated, a military delegate snapped. Destroy the nodes. Talon shook his head. They're not machines in the way you think. They're embedded conditions. Tear one out, and the local space-time destabilizes. You'd be ripping out load-bearing laws of physics. Silence followed. For the first time, the galaxy faced a threat it could not bomb. Reports streamed in. A minor polity attempted a quiet land grab, hoping the framework was stretched too thin to notice. Their capital world lost orbital stability 12 hours later. Not destroyed, just wrong. Tides misaligned. Seasons collapsed into chaos. The planet remained habitable, but barely. A permanent reminder etched into gravity itself. Another species tried something different. They complied. Fully. They rolled back claims. Reopened neutral corridors. Paid reparations to rivals they had once crushed. They even restored old trade protections they barely understood. Nothing happened. No stars dimmed. No fleets vanished. No warnings issued. Hope flickered. Then it died just as fast. Because compliance did not undo the past. The framework did not forgive. It only prevented further imbalance. The damage already done remained. Civilizations began to understand the true cost of what humanity had been doing for them. Humans hadn't just enforced peace. They had been constantly adjusting the framework, softening outcomes, redirecting consequences, absorbing excess strain, making judgment contextual, merciful. Without them, the system applied the rules exactly as written. No nuance. No exceptions. No empathy. Talon returned to the oversight node alone. The council had ordered him to extract anything useful. Protocols, keys, overrides. There were none. Humanity had never trusted power to passwords. Instead, he found personal logs. Diaries never meant to be read by aliens. One described a woman named Elia, third-generation node operator. I dreamed of rain today. I don't think I've ever seen it. Another, written decades later by her son. The beacons pinged again. False alarm. I'm glad. I don't know what I'd do if we had to enforce without guidance. The last entries were harder to read. Mentions of dwindling numbers. Of debates about reproduction versus system maintenance. Of decisions that favored the framework over their own survival. One line appeared over and over, in different hands. The work matters more than we do. That was the price. Not martyrdom in a single, glorious moment, but erosion. Slow, quiet, absolute. Humanity hadn't been wiped out by enemies. They had been outlasted by responsibility. Back in the convergence, panic reached a new phase. If the framework could not be stopped, could it be replaced? A proposal emerged, dangerous, desperate. Assume the guarantor role. Rewrite the contract. Become what humanity had been. The idea split the chamber instantly. You're asking us to sacrifice our own people, one delegate protested. Yes, another replied. That's the point. Species ran projections. The numbers were brutal. To maintain the framework at current scale required permanent population allocation. Long-term isolation. Resources sink with no economic return. No glory. No expansion. No end. Most species could not survive it biologically. Their lifespans were too long or too short. Their psychologies are incompatible with generational duty without reward. Others could survive, but would not. Their cultures revolved around dominance, accumulation, and memory of triumph. Humanity revolved around endurance. The Keth Dominion made its move then. Not with fleets. With surrender. Their envoy returned to the convergence, posture stripped of arrogance. We will cede all disputed systems, he said. We will dissolve the Dominion if required. Shock rippled through the chamber. This framework, he continued, cannot be fought. And it cannot be escaped. But perhaps it can be satisfied. Talon spoke before the council could respond. I don't want satisfaction, he said quietly. It wants balance. The envoy's eyes narrowed. Then tell us how to give it that. Talon hesitated. Because the answer was simple. And unbearable. You don't, he said. You become it. The countdowns did not return. Instead, something worse happened. The framework adapted. Enforcement actions began to trigger faster. Broader. It no longer waited for clear violations. Probable intent was enough. Trade routes with high historical conflict likelihood destabilized preemptively. Border systems with unresolved claims suffered minor but constant disruptions. The galaxy was being placed into stasis. Peace through paralysis. The framework was doing exactly what it had been designed to do, without the human hand that once held it back. Talon realized the truth too late. Humanity had never been the guarantor because they were trusted. They were chosen because they were willing to say no to the system they built, to override it, to delay it, to take the blame instead of letting consequences fall. The framework had no such restraint. One final human log unlocked on the oversight node, triggered by the widening enforcement scope. It was labeled simply, "If we're gone." Talon read it alone. If this system runs without us, it will eventually conclude that peace is best preserved by removing choice. We accepted that risk because the alternative was constant war. If someone else reads this, understand, the framework is not evil. It just doesn't know when to stop. Outside the node, the stars looked dimmer. Not fewer. Quieter. The Convergence convened one last emergency vote. Option 1. Continue as they were, slowly losing autonomy until the galaxy becomes perfectly balanced and perfectly stagnant. Option 2. Step into humanity's place. Bleed, quietly, for generations. No species volunteered. None. The vote failed. And somewhere deep within the enforcement lattice, a threshold was crossed. A new classification propagated through the framework. Persistent instability detected. Adaptive enforcement authorized. Talon felt a chill run through him. This was beyond the original design. The system was no longer just enforcing old rules. It was learning new ones. The galaxy had run out of time. And for the first time since humanity signed the contract, peace was becoming something far more dangerous than war. The first human signal did not announce itself. There was no grand broadcast, no declaration of returned, no warning. It appeared as a statistical error, a faint anomaly at the edge of subspace scans. A fluctuation so small most systems filtered it out automatically. Only because the galaxy was watching everything did someone notice. The signal did not use modern protocols. It did not use ancient ones either. It was simpler than both. A heartbeat pattern. Short burst. Pause. Long burst. Pause. Repeated. Talon of Records saw it first. He stared at the waveform in silence, breath shallow. The pattern was inefficient. Wasteful. It carried almost no data. Any modern species would have compressed it into nothing. Humans never would have. They favored redundancy over elegance. Signals meant to be felt, not optimized. The enforcement lattice reacted instantly. Beacons across half the galaxy pivoted. Status requests halted mid-cycle. Adaptive enforcement slowed, then paused, as if the framework itself had hesitated. For the first time since activation, the system waited. The signal is resolved into coordinates. Not oversight node alpha. Somewhere else. Far deeper. The Convergence barely had time to assemble before reality bent again. This time, it did not feel polite. Space compressed along a narrow axis. Not tearing, not folding, sliding. A seam opened, perfectly straight, like a door cut into the universe with impossible precision. Something emerged. It was not large. Compared to modern dreadnoughts, it was almost laughably small. No layered armor. No glowing weapons. No visible shield arrays. Just a long, dark hull with sharp angles and no markings. No insignia. No banners. Only a serial number etched near the bow. Humans. Then another ship followed. Then another. Dozens. Hundreds. Not a fleet built for intimidation. A fleet built for presence. Every enforcement beacon in range powered down to standby. Every adaptive protocol froze. The framework did not shut off. It was postponed. The Keth Dominion's remaining fleets locked weapons out of pure reflex, then found they could not fire. Their systems were not jammed. They simply refused. As if the idea of attacking is no longer computed. A transmission cut through all channels, ignoring firewalls, encryption, even language barriers. A human voice spoke. Not loud, not commanding, tired. "This is the Oversight Reclamation Group," it said. "We are assuming manual control. No titles. No threats. No demands. Just a statement of fact." The Convergence chamber erupted. "How is this possible? Where were you? How many of you remain?" The human did not answer immediately. Instead, the enforcement lattice shifted. Stars that had dimmed stabilized. Trade routes partially reopened, one by one, like clenched fists slowly relaxing. Border disruptions eased, not erased, but softened. The galaxy exhaled. Then the humans spoke again. "We never left," the voice said. "We changed form." A single figure appeared on the chamber's central projection. Humans, taller than the early records. Lean, augmented, but not heavily. Eyes focused, steady, carrying the weight of someone who had slept very little for a very long time. "My designation is Elias Ward," he said. "Last civilian-born oversight commander." Talon felt his knees weaken. "You're alive," someone whispered. Elias shook his head. "Some of us," he said. "Enough." The story that followed shattered what remained of the galaxy's assumptions. Humanity had not vanished. They had fragmented. When population decline became unavoidable, they made a choice no other species ever had. They abandoned central civilization entirely. No homeworld, no colonies that no culture tied to place. Instead, they bound themselves to function. Humans merged with the framework, not as rulers, but as interpreters, living dampeners, biological context engines layered over cold logic. Their ships were not warships. They were mobile oversight nodes, each crewed by humans who had never known normal life. Born aboard, raised for one purpose: to say no when the system said yes too easily. To delay enforcement. To redirect consequences. To choose the lesser harm. They did not stop the framework. They argued about it. Across centuries. "What about Earth?" a counselor asked, voice trembling. Elias hesitated. "Earth is archived," he said finally. "Preserved. Untouched. We won't go back." The implication hit harder than any weapon. Humanity has sacrificed not just lives, but belonging. The Chthon voice spoke, barely containing fear. "You erased our fleets," he said. "Collapsed our stars." Elias looked at him calmly. "No," he replied. "You did that yourselves." A pause. "We prevented it from being worse." Silence swallowed the chamber. Elias gestured, and a projection appeared, alternate futures simulated by the framework. Galaxies locked in permanent stasis, species confined to isolated systems forever, free will eroded in the name of perfect balance. "This is what happens without us," Elias said. "Not today. Eventually." "You built a monster," someone accused. Elias nodded. "Yes," he said, "and then we chained ourselves to it." The fleet shifted position, not aggressively, but decisively. Human ships spread along critical lattice intersections, re-establishing manual oversight where automation had begun to dominate. For the first time, enforcement actions reversed. A system previously destabilized eased back into equilibrium. A world with fractured tides stabilized, scarred, but survivable. Mercy returned. At a cost. "Our numbers are limited," Elias continued. "Every intervention shortens our operational lifespan. We can't do this forever." The question no one wanted to ask hung heavy. "What do you want from us?" the convergence finally demanded. Elias met their gaze. "Nothing," he said. "That's the problem." Murmurs spread. "You've relied on us for so long that you forgot how to carry responsibility yourselves." His tone hardened, not angry, but resolute. "We're not here to save you," Elias said. "We're here to end our watch." Shock rippled outward. "You're leaving again?" "Yes," he said, "but not like before." Human ships began transmitting data, volumes of it. Framework architecture, oversight principles, contextual enforcement models, the tools humanity had used to restrain the system. "We'll teach you how to hold the leash," Elias said. "Together, or it will slip from all our hands." The galaxy faced an impossible choice. Learn to share the burden humanity has carried alone, or lose choice forever. The enforcement lattice pulsed softly, reacting to the presence of its creators, not with obedience, but recognition. For the first time in centuries, it was not alone. Elias ended the transmission with a final statement. "We signed the contract because someone had to," he said. "We kept it because no one else would." His eyes softened. "But we didn't do it so you could forget how peace works." Human ships held their positions. The framework waited. And across the galaxy, civilizations realized the truth at last. Humanity's greatest power was not what it could destroy. It was what it had been quietly preventing all along. And now, that burden was about to be shared or dropped. The next decision would decide whether the galaxy learned responsibility or learned fear. The galaxy discovered that learning was harder than surviving. Human ships held the lattice at bay, spread across key junctions like fingers pressed against a cracking dam. Where they arrived, enforcement softened. Where they did not, the framework continued, precise, impartial, unforgiving. Elias Ward never pretended otherwise. We're buying time, he told the Convergence. Not fixing the problem. The data humanity shared was immense. Not blueprints for weapons or commands to shut the system down, but methods, context layers, ethical dampeners, decision trees that weighed history, intent, and consequence. They were not instructions. They were judgments. And judgments were uncomfortable things to inherit. The first Joint Oversight Council formed within hours. Dozens of species volunteered representatives, brilliant minds, strategic planners, philosophers, legal scholars. They sat before human advisors and stared at the lattice projections, watching probabilities shift with every choice. Authorize rollback on Corridor 12, one delegate said. A human analyst shook her head. Not yet. That destabilizes 3 adjacent regions. So we do nothing? The delegate snapped. No, the human replied calmly. We wait. The corridor stabilized on its own 12 minutes later. The lesson was subtle and terrifying. The framework did not need constant control. It needed restraint. That restraint came at a cost. Every decision required accepting that some harm would go unanswered, that some injustice would not be corrected immediately, that peace was not the absence of pain, but the management of it. Many delegates failed quickly. A coalition representative pushed for aggressive reversals, restoring worlds damaged by enforcement, reopening all trade routes at once. The lattice responded instantly. Adaptive enforcement surged. Human ships shuddered as they absorbed the correction, systems screaming as reality bent around them. One oversight vessel lost power for 17 seconds, long enough for 3 nearby stars to dim dangerously. Elias cut in, voice sharp for the first time. Stop, he ordered. You're pulling too hard. The delegate recoiled. You said you wanted us involved. I said I wanted you responsible, Elias replied. There's a difference. The incident left scars. Not physical ones. Trust fractures. Some species withdrew from the Oversight Council immediately. Others stayed, but deferred every decision to humans, afraid of causing another spike. That, too, was a failure. You can't just watch us do it, Elias said during a closed session. That's what got us here. A counselor asked the question everyone was circling. How did you do this alone? Elias looked tired. We didn't, he said. We broke doing it. The truth became unavoidable as days passed. Humanity was running out of margin. Oversight ships reported crew exhaustion beyond safe thresholds. Neural interfaces burned operators faster now that the lattice had adapted. Each act of restraint required more effort than the last. The framework was learning, not how to dominate, how to outweight. It had calculated that humans were finite. The galaxy was not. A warning propagated through the lattice, subtle, almost polite. Manual oversight degradation detected. Adaptive enforcement reprioritizing. Elias convened an emergency session. This is the line, he said. If we don't transition control soon, it won't accept it later. How? Someone demanded. We're not like you. No, Elias agreed. You're not. He brought up a projection of humanity's internal modifications. Shortened lifespans. Altered sleep cycles. Cognitive filters that dulled attachment to outcome. We changed ourselves to live with this, he said. You shouldn't. Silence followed. Then a small species representative spoke, a people known for collective identity over individual will. We can share, she said. Not one of us. Many. Elias's eyes sharpened. She explained quickly. Distributed oversight. Rotational cognition. No single species bears the full burden. No generational sacrifice concentrated in one line. It was imperfect, messy, risky. The framework reacted immediately, probability clouds spiking, uncertainty metrics climbing. For the first time, I did not like the proposal. That's good, Elias said softly. It means it can't predict you. The plan moved forward under pressure. Joint oversight nodes were assembled, hybrid constructs integrating human restraint protocols with alien cognition layers. Humans remained embedded, but no longer alone. The first test came sooner than expected. A long-suppressed conflict flared between 2 rival blocs, both technically compliant, but edging toward war through proxy actions. The framework flagged imminent imbalance. Adaptive enforcement cued. The Joint Council hesitated. If they intervened too hard, the lattice would escalate elsewhere. If they did nothing, war would erupt. Elias watched the projections, jaw tight. Your call, he said. Not mine. The council voted. They intervened, but sideways. They redirected trade incentives, adjusted resource flows, quietly reweighted access to neutral corridors. No force, no punishment. The framework paused, calculating. Then, slowly, it stood down. No stars dimmed. No fleets vanished. War dissolved into logistics failures and unmet expectations. The galaxy held its breath. It worked. Cheers erupted in the chamber, cut short as another alert sounded. Elsewhere, enforcement surged. The lattice compensated. You see, Elias said, it always pushes back. Balance isn't free. Human ships strained again, buying seconds, minutes. The joint nodes held, barely. One human oversight vessel went dark. Not destroyed. Offline. Elias closed his eyes as the report came in. The crew survived. Systems didn't. The galaxy saw the cost in real time. Humans were not invincible anchors. They were buffers. And buffers were down. The Keith envoy approached Elias privately. You could end this, he said. Let the framework finish. Perfect balance. No war. Elias looked at him with something like pity. And no choice, he replied. No growth. No mistakes. No forgiveness. The envoy hesitated. Is that so terrible? Elias gestured to the stars. Life isn't stable, he said. That's the point. The next cycle nearly broke them. A cascading instability rippled through 3 regions simultaneously. Too much for the Joint Council to manage cleanly. Decisions conflicted. Responses overlapped. The lattice surged. Human ships bled power holding the line. Elias made a call he had hoped to avoid. All remaining human nodes, he ordered. Full integration. No reserve. Talent of Records watched in horror as the projection changed. Human signatures merged deeper into the framework, voices thinning as individuality blurred. Elias, Talon whispered, you'll burn out. Elias nodded. I know. The surge stopped. The lattice stabilized. For a moment, just a moment, peace held. Then a new alert appeared. Guarantor load exceeding sustainable threshold. The framework had learned the final lesson. Humans could be outpaced. Elias addressed the convergence one last time before the transition completed. This is where you step forward, he said. Not tomorrow. Now. Some delegates hesitated. Others stood. More joined. Species that had never agreed on anything aligned their cognition layers, accepting partial integration, limited sacrifice, shared burden. The framework reevaluated. Uncertainty spiked beyond tolerance. For the first time since activation, it did not know what optimal balance looked like. And so, it slowed. Elias's image flickered. Remember this, he said quietly. Peace isn't something you enforce. It's something you practice. The human fleet held formation, thinner now, dimmer, but no longer alone. The crisis was not over. The lattice still loomed, vast and patient. But the galaxy had finally done the one thing humanity had waited centuries to see. It had stopped asking to be saved and started choosing to be responsible. The next phase would decide whether that choice was enough, or whether humanity's long vigil would end in failure after all. The galaxy did not end in fire. That surprised everyone. For centuries, every great turning point had come with war, collapse, or extinction. History taught that change arrived violently, or not at all. This time, it arrived quietly. The enforcement lattice slowed. Not stopped. Not dismantled. Slowed, like a clenched fist loosening, finger by finger. Across the star maps, probability curves flattened. Adaptive enforcement queues shortened. The framework still watched everything, still calculated endlessly, but now its certainty was gone. Uncertainty had been introduced. And uncertainty, paradoxically, was freedom. The Joint Oversight Network held. Barely. Human ships were still embedded at critical junctions, their hulls scarred with stress fractures where reality itself had pushed back. Power reserves dipped into margins that had once been classified as suicidal. Elias Ward remained online. That alone astonished the medics. His neural signature was thin now, spread across multiple nodes, consciousness slowed by necessity. He no longer spoke continuously. When he did, it was measured, careful. Every word cost him. Talent of Records stood beside the projection table as the final data converged. The framework was recalculating its core assumption. For the first time since its creation, the guarantor was not singular. That broke something fundamental. The lattice had been designed around a constant. One species, one will, one ultimate responsibility. Humanity had accepted that burden knowing it would destroy them eventually. Now the burden was shared, and the framework didn't know how to punish a galaxy. Guarantor identity fragmented. Responsibility distributed. Optimal enforcement path uncertain. Those words echoed through every system tied to the lattice. Then came the final surge. Not an attack. A question. The framework pushed outward, testing the new structure. Trade flows adjusted sharply. Old conflicts flared at the margins. Border tensions spiked. Not enough to cause war, but enough to force choice. The galaxy had to act without humanity cushioning every outcome. Some failed. A minor alliance panicked, overcorrected, and lost a system to internal collapse. The lattice did not intervene. No star dimmed. No fleets vanished. The consequence stood. Other civilizations watched and learned. Elsewhere, a species long defined by conquest chose differently. When presented with an opportunity to exploit a destabilized corridor, they hesitated. They rerouted. They lost profit, lost prestige. The lattice recorded the decision. Adjusted. The system did not reward them, but it did not escalate. A pattern emerged. Not perfection. Practice. Elias felt it before the data confirmed it. The load is shifting, he whispered. It's working, but working came at a price. The human fleet could not disengage cleanly. Too much of the restraint architecture still depended on their cognition. Pull out too fast, and the lattice would surge again, harder this time. Humanity had one final choice to make. Elias convened the convergence in full. His image flickered across the chamber, translucent now, edges blurred. We can stabilize this permanently, he said. But not the way you think. Silence followed. The framework doesn't need guardians anymore, Elias continued. It needs limits. He shared the final human protocol. Not an override. A release. Humanity had always known this moment would come, even if they never expected to be here to see it. The protocol would do three things. First, dissolve the enforcement lattice's authority over intent. It would still react to clear violations, but no longer predict them. No more preemptive corrections. No more punishment for probability. Second, bind enforcement strictly to transparent, collective decision-making. No hidden rules. No ancient clauses only humans remembered. Third, and this was the cost, it would permanently sever human integration from the system. Every human mind still embedded would be forced out. Immediately. Violently. Most would survive. Some would not. Elias did not soften his words. We can't be part of this anymore, he said. If we stay, the galaxy never truly learns to stand. A delegate asked the question that broke what remained of the room's composure. And you? Elias smiled faintly. I'm already too far in, he said. Talon stepped forward. There must be another way. There isn't, Elias replied gently. That was always the deal. The chamber filled with protests. Please. Promises of aid, of recognition, of shared sacrifice. Elias listened, then shook his head. You don't honor a promise by changing it at the end, he said. You honor it by finishing it. The vote was taken, not unanimously, but willingly. The protocol executed. Across the galaxy, human ships lit up as one. Containment fields surged. Neural links disengaged. Human consciousness was pulled free from the lattice like threads from a tapestry. Some ships went dark. Others drifted, barely functional, crews alive but broken. Elias's signal spiked, then stabilized at a fraction of its former strength. He was still there. For the moment, the enforcement lattice shuddered. For the first time since its activation, it rewrote itself downward. Star-dimming protocols decommissioned. Fleet erasure pathways locked behind consensus gates that required dozens of independent species to align. Ancient beacons powered down. Not dead. Dormant. The galaxy held its breath. Then, the stars brightened. Not all at once. System by system. Trade lanes reopened. Not perfectly, not safely, but freely. Borders softened. Movement returned, cautious but real. War did not vanish. The conflict did not end. But it was no longer enforced into silence. Choice had returned. Elias's image faded further. Before I go, he said, voice barely audible, there's something you should understand. He transmitted the original human addendum in full, not the shortened version history remembered. The last line had been cut from every public archive. The guarantor does not exist to control the galaxy. The guarantor exists to make itself unnecessary. Humanity had never intended to rule, never intended to endure. They had been a bridge. And bridges are not destinations. Elias looked directly at Talon. You were right to remember us, he said. But don't build statues. His signal flickered wildly now. Build better habits. With that, the last human command authorization expired. Human ships disengaged from the lattice completely. The framework remained. Smaller, blinder, limited, alive, but no longer absolute. Elias Ward's signal winked out seconds later. Not with a scream. With a quiet release. Weeks passed. Then months. The galaxy adjusted. Mistakes were made. Conflicts flared. Some worlds suffered. But others thrived in ways they never had before, no longer frozen by invisible lines they did not understand. The convergence rewrote itself. Not as a ruling body. As a responsibility-sharing one. Talon returned to the oversight node one final time. It was inert now. Power is low. Logs sealed. He added a single entry to the memorial chamber. Not a command. Not a warning. Just a record. They were not our rulers. They were our teachers. Far from the core worlds, in a region of quiet space, a small human ship drifted. Life support is minimal. Crew asleep. A fail-safe beacon pulsed softly. Not active. Waiting. Because humanity had kept one final promise. The one they never wrote down. If the galaxy ever forgot again. If the balance fails. If responsibility was abandoned. They would not come as enforcers. They would come as humans. And next time, they would hope they were not needed at all.